Zoom hear us?
Okay.
Can you all hear me? That's interesting because all I hear is unintelligible chirps and twerps. Now you're coming a little clearer, but it's still very distorted.
Class. Back on those tears. Oh, it's a society. You don't want to save the Jewish people. Another locally, and we can hear.
So is it you not hearing or them not hearing?
They can't hear, or we can't hear them.
We can hear them.
Oh, we can hear them?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear them fine.
She was fine.
Okay, so it's just us not hearing.
Now the sound is coming through much better, particularly from those people who are standing near the equipment.
How about me?
I'm starting to be able to understand you.
We just don't think about it, so.
Yeah,
Hmm.
okay.
I think that's probably good enough for me to be able to listen now. Thank you.
Being there to tell us these things. So as I was saying, around the turn of the 20th century, Albert Schweitzer was one of the most amazing human beings that ever lived. I mean, like the great interpreter of Bach, particularly his organ works. And then he becomes a surgeon and goes to Africa, makes no money at all, helping people in Africa doing surgeries. I don't know how good he was at that, but he had good hands, obviously. So maybe it's tremendous. But he wrote this whole thing on the historical Jesus, which I don't know how it was received at the time, but we still have it, of course. And it got people thinking. Germans have been there. Okay, good. Germans have been thinking about this issue since the middle of the 19th century. And Schweitzer's German, of course, but he's German American, so he brought it across the pond. And it kind of lay fallow because the 20th century gave birth to the fundamentalist movement. That was the big discussion. And then finally, along comes John Dominic Crossan. He wrote a book on the parables about 1970, and others who just started coming together. Borg found Marcus Borg from Portland, and John Dominic Crossan, born in Ireland, find each other, and they feed off each other in just marvelous ways about this whole business of what can we believe about Jesus? Did he walk on water? That's hard for anybody to believe, right? Is that okay? If that's metaphor, what isn't metaphor? The virgin birth, that's right there with the walking on water, as are several things like the ascension of Jesus that shows up in the book of Acts, where he goes up. Now, we all know that up isn't up anymore, right? Up is out. Up is different. We're not talking about a 3-story universe. So, okay, I wanted to get that far in and then ask a question. This church has been doing Jesus seminar stuff for 25 years, right? Something like that or more. Is this all this old hat to people in the room?
Not everyone has participated in that.
No.
Say it's not new, but it certainly is an old hat. There's a lot of people there.
Right.
We might have read the book, but we can't write the book. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jesus scholarship, you know that there's no uniform. I mean, there are certain fundamental things. The Jesus scholars all agree that Jesus didn't walk on water. That is a metaphor. Yeah. Where his life stops being metaphoric, there's a range of places. And I put out books there from our wonderful library, which is highly informed by the Jesus Seminar. Those are just some of the seminal books about this subject we're talking about today. If you're interested, I invite you to take a look at those anytime you want and borrow them and look deeper at this whole thing.
I want to make one note about the books and Crossan, which is that his first stab at really collecting everything he knew into a book and publishing it
came out about this thick and really scholarly, and didn't sell very well.
Right.
And so,
It's right there.
and it's there. There's also, what's the title of it? Then he wrote
Jesus the Revolutionary or something like that.
he wrote a shorter,
It's
more
there.
accessible version
Right.
of that. But so they're sort of both the same, his attempts at the same thing, but if you want to read John Dominic Cross, and go for the smaller books.
Yeah. And Borg is a bit softer. I mean, but Crossan likes to say things that make your mouth fall open, whereas Borg's he's more nuanced, and so just take that with a grain of salt. Years ago in Portland, at the University of Portland, they brought in a scholar from Harvard, Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza. Anybody heard that name before? A couple of you. She's a wonderful scholar, German, obviously, who taught at Harvard in New Testament. And she told us, this is like 30 some years ago when she was kind of in the beginnings of her career. She's retired now. She said that oftentimes she'd be hosted by Catholic churches. She was Catholic in the Boston area. And she would come in and give a little talk about one thing or another. She said, though, I was on a mission. She said, and my mission was to try to convince Catholics that Jesus was Jewish. So I want to bring that up because that's a really important part of this kind of subject where the rubber hits the road with our biases, our bigotry in some cases, and those other things. She said she went all over to small groups, and people would come out, in groups of 6 to 30 and listen to her. And she, Jesus was this, he's born in upcountry, rural Israel, which wasn't Israel, it was really Palestine. It's controlled by the Romans, blah, 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 blah. And he was Jewish, and he spoke Aramaic, and she'd go out with all these things. And people, it was just like this thing, this haze over people's faces. And she told us, she said, she remembered there was one woman who spoke up in the class and said, okay. Jesus might have been Jewish, but the Holy Mother of God certainly was not. Warren laughed. Yeah. I just think that's what we're dealing with here. that you just kind of makes you think, oh my God. But it's okay. I get it. If you're raised a certain way, you're raised a certain way. So I want to veer off a little bit here and talk about William de Vere as I'm veering off. What I want to talk for just 30 seconds about is the historical Shakespeare. And I do that because that's a fascinating question as well. Not that people don't believe that Shakespeare lived. There's every record, baptism record, marriage record, about Shakespeare, but there are a significant number of people who believe that there's no way that the man of Stratford on Avon could have possibly written those plays. You know why? Remember why? You know what the discussion's about? Because the person who wrote those had to have gone to college and been some sort of great Renaissance mind. So they posit Francis Bacon or William de Vere. There's probably some other candidates, some women maybe even who had certain knowledge, but which could make so much sense. However, it trips me up, the thought that he had to have gone to college to write the plays. We do know that he was in school at Stratford. Who's been in the room where Shakespeare went to school? It's one of the coolest things in the world is to go into that schoolhouse that's still a school for children of Stratford, where he performed as a young person the plays of Seneca. He knew what he said. But they're great people who believe this, and they just can't get past the idea that he didn't go to college. And, you know, big university, which was available to so many people who had a lot of money. I forgot where I was going with that. There was a little more there. Forgot what it was. Anyway, Jesus probably didn't go to college, right? We're pretty sure. Yeah. But there's a lot of debate among Jesus scholars about his level of education. There are many people who think that passage that I preached on just weeks ago about his sermon in the synagogue in Nazareth could not have happened because there probably was there's no archaeological record of a synagogue in Nazareth. And it's probably too small a town to have one anyway. There probably was no Hebrew school. But then, you know, the best scholars that I've worked with personally, you know, and I've spent a lot of time on this, believe that Jesus could, in fact, read Hebrew, that he could read a little bit of Greek, and that he could read Roman road signs in Latin, right? As well as speak Aramaic. This was not a stretch by any imagination. So, you know, I'm going to preach today about the connection between the Beatitudes of Jesus and the lines in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, 1-8, about there's a time for everything under heaven. And I can't believe that the person who wrote the Beatitudes didn't understand Ecclesiastes and read Ecclesiastes, or at least hear it and memorize it. In fact, there was a Baptist minister, I think I might have referred to once, gosh darn, I can't remember his name now, out of Scio down by Albany, who
lived there.
you live, oh, that's right, who was totally illiterate, read nothing, but memorized vast portions of the Bible because his wife read it to him at least an hour every day, and he just had an absorbing kind of brain. And so he was familiar with the scriptures right and left. I mean, he just took it right into him. So that's another argument against the people who believe that Shakespeare
It was also very popular, very common in slavery times for some
Right.
of slaves to become great preachers without being literate.
Right. And could process the nuances of the scriptures. A lot of people have common sense. I think that's the thing I know most about Jesus. His common sense is of a level of that is extraordinary, but he's able to extrapolate from nature some rules of the world that he speaks of beyond the lilies of the field, that you go, wow, this guy knows what's going on. Like the fact that everybody in his day believed that if you were, I've said this too many times maybe, if you were sick or poor, it was your damn fault. And he said instead, no, just look where the rain falls. It falls on the fields of the shyster farmer who puts his foot on the scale when they weigh his grain, just the same as it falls on the fields of the faithful farmer. Get over any idea that God favors one over another. Doesn't work that way. He understood the book of Job really well. So, we were talking about, I began by talking about the fact that I've done this class in 10 hours. Come on in, Joanne. I've done this class in 10 hours. But I'm I don't think I've ever done it in 2 hours, but that's okay. Marcus Borg, who taught at Oregon State University, go Beavers, said he taught his course, he'd teach the Jesus thing in a semester. He would go on the road with it, as he did all over the country, and do it in 30 hours in some places, in 3 hours in some places, in an hour in others. And then he went on the Today Show once. And he had a minute and 15 seconds. They talked to him longer, but they said, we'll only give you a very tiny moment to say anything of length. 1 minute and 15 seconds. And so we worked like heck on this. And they were to prompt him. But Brian Gumball, I know, they asked him a question that went the wrong direction and he almost couldn't say it. But he found a way to say his 1 minute and 15 second synopsis of Jesus for the millions who were watching that morning, or probably a million people. And here's what he wrote. He said of Jesus, he was a peasant, he was a peasant, which tells us about his social class. Clearly, he was brilliant. His use of language was remarkable and poetic, filled with images and stories. He had a metaphoric mind. He was not an ascetic, what an ascetic is, a monk of some sort. Instead, he was world-affirming with a zest for life. There was a social political passion to him. Like a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King, he challenged the domination system of his day. He was a religious ecstatic, a Jewish mystic, if you will, for whom God was an experiential reality. As such, he was also a healer, and there seems to have been a spiritual presence about him, like that reported of St. Francis or the Dalai Lama. And I suggest that as a figure of history, he was an ambiguous figure. You could experience him and conclude that he was insane, as his family did, or that he was simply eccentric, or that he was a dangerous threat, or you could conclude that he was filled with the Spirit of God. Isn't that remarkable?
Yes, end of class.
Right, exactly. And the examples he chooses are just wonderful. Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., St. Francis, Dalai Lama. We'll have to read that again next week. Any reflections that come to you this moment? Because I don't want to just make this a monologue. I'm good with that.
Anything important that he missed in his minute and 15 seconds?
Right.
What would you add?
What would you add? That's a darn good, but
Jesus has been kind of abstract.
he's kind of abstract.
This has been really for most of my life.
Okay. You want to say a few words about
This is just recently trying to understand like this is an actual person. Like it's really, really cool to relate it to figures I understand. I kind of
that you can get a sense of? Yeah. Yeah. Mark says that when Jesus was walking, people went along with him and were filled with awe. So he had a charismatic sense about him, obviously. He mentions the domination system of his day and never mentions the cross, but there it is, right? If you get that. He didn't say he died for our sins. Because he did. Yes.
This is just me. I always thought that the cross was not an appropriate symbol for Jesus because it doesn't say anything about his life, only about his death. And that really is kind of the main point with what he did during his life. Yes, he died, and yes, he was a martyr, in my opinion. But I just can't get around, wearing the cross. Or as a symbol, of Christianity. I don't think that's what Christianity is about.
That's interesting.
I think of Jesus as a performer. If he could perform in the marketplace with everything going on and people listened, he has to have had an ability to stop traffic.
That's well said. But you're worried about the cross. I mean, we go on for days about that.
I know.
You remember, gosh, his name's on the tip of my tongue. The comic, the really edgy comic from the 50s.
Lenny Bruce.
Lenny Bruce, yeah, said that if Jesus had died in the 1950s, we'd all be wearing little electric chairs around our necks, which got a lot. He got a lot of attention from that. and you could say that. However, like I think I said in a sermon once, my mother was about to have surgery that she might not have survived. And when the Catholic priest brought her a crucifix and put it in her hands, that meant the world to her. Just holding the cross, right? So there is something really significant there. There's two comments here. I'm going to go there and then over to my buddy here.
For me, there's a big difference between the empty cross, which is about rebirth, and the cross with Jesus on it. To me, there's a huge difference.
Say more about that.
Well, the empty cross is about he lives, resurrection, and the death of Christian. It wasn't the death of Christianity. So for me, the cross is a message of hope. But the cross with Jesus on it, which you see more in the Catholic Church, that's about the death.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
you came from Mexico City, where Jesus isn't just dying, he's dying in gory detail, right? I mean, there's something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Catholic churches in general tend to have the crucifixion different than,
That's right.
it's just a personal thing.
Right, but it is a
The
big,
empty cross,
Right.
it's a cross that.
right,
of
That's a-
resurrection.
of the resurrection, and that's a Protestant mark, right?
And Christianity, it did not die.
Yeah. Well said.
Well, I was just gonna ask a question. I mean, the dove seems like a much better symbol for him. So why did they use the cross?
Probably because Paul made such a thing of it. The Apostle Paul, when he writes his letters, he said if Jesus did, he talks about the cross. Okay, I'm not a good enough New Testament scholar to quote him directly. I just know that he makes such a thing about the cross that I could see why people would hew those out of wood in his lifetime.
I mean, it's an easy one to make.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're looking for a symbol, you don't want to have something like, well, you can't do it.
And Constantine's mother went to Jerusalem and found several crosses on that same place where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built, because it was a crucifixion site. And she decided which one Jesus had died on, which is kind of funny, but that shows you how important the cross was at that point in 330 or whatever that was. 20.
Yeah, two comments about that. One is, I was going to say, Church of the Holy Sepulchre is a terrible name for a place honoring
Yeah.
Jesus, because like your Jesus on the cross, it's like, this is the Church of the dead Jesus, it's like, But that was what Romans did. They built temples to their dead heroes, and they treated Jesus the same way. They sort of forgot the resurrection part. And the other thing was, I think for Paul, it was that the cross was, but the whole challenge for Paul and the very first believers in Jesus was to explain how the Messiah could suffer. And so to explain that even though Jesus had been crucified, he was the Messiah and he was Son of God and he was important to God. So that was the whole thing. And so I think when Paul talks about the folly of the cross, it's about believing in a Son of God who was killed. And so that kind of puts Jesus' death at the center of the argument. But I'm still not sure the cross is a good symbol for people to
So
wear
you're
around their
saying-
necks.
You're saying that because he was a God and he was crucified, that shows him as in a unique way.
Right.
Because other deities or their deities did not
Yeah.
die.
Because heroes were supposed to be heroes who didn't get killed, But yeah, unless. Anyway.
Yeah. So I want to address that right now. Actually, I'm going to take a little time to get to the point there, but hang in there. When my daughter was 8 years old, she asked me, Dad, did Jesus really live? And she's a really good natural skeptic. And I told her I believed it, and I did some further research, and because a lot of people, I mean, there are those, you can find them on YouTube all over the place today. Jesus didn't really live; it was just a story that was made up. I think the details are so remarkable. My sense is you can't make this stuff up. but there's more. There's actually more than that. We have the Roman historian Tacitus, whose dates are 56 CE, Common Era, to 120 CE. So you get his time. He was born about the same time Paul was preaching and lived till 120. Anyway, he reported on Emperor Nero's decision to blame Christians, whatever the Christian church amounted to, in 64 AD CE. I should stick with that. 64 CE for destroying Rome by fire. Always want to blame your enemies for anything that's done. Okay, I won't go on with that. Here's what Tacitus said. I know, has not changed. Nero fastened the guilt on a class hatred for their abominations called Christians. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, according to Tacitus, suffered the extreme penalty under the reign of Tiberius at the hands of Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment by Nero, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. So there's someone who believed that he lived, that it was not a matter of question. Also, Pliny the Younger wrote Emperor Trajan about these people. They were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a god, and bound themselves by a solemn oath not to do any wicked deeds, and never commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up. After which it was their custom to separate and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. It's a real interesting statement about the early community, trying to cut through the crap that was about that they were drinking blood and eating and cannibals and stuff like that. Here's somebody who did some research and came back and said these are people who may believe a stupid superstition, but they're of an innocent kind, and in fact, they're morally quite amazing. So I mentioned Emperor Constantine. I want to get back to our question about the cross a little bit. Emperor Constantine, who, comes along in the 310, I can't remember when he becomes emperor, but makes a calculated decision to make Christianity the state religion, and notes that to do that he has to have some peace among these Christian sects, because though Christianity is growing quickly and widely, there are all these discrete communities that believe very different things about the founder of the faith. So he puts them up in hotels in Nicaea and says, take as long as you need, I'll pay for this. Is talking to the bishops of the day, who come from all over the Mediterranean world for this, risking their lives because that's what you do. And says to them, you figure this Jesus thing out. I don't care if he's 100% God or 100% human. I don't care, as long as I'm the main act on earth. So then they come up with the Nicene Creed. I don't know if they vote, democratically or what. It's very possible they did. And they come out with the Nicene Creed, and this is what they say about Jesus. He's born of the Virgin Mary and suffered under Pontius Pilate, right? So born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. Did those bishops care anything at all for the teachings of Jesus? No. All they wanted was the church to come to them for forgiveness of their sins and pay their tithes. And, it's a one and done Christianity. You become a Christian, and then you come back for communion weekly, and they may or may not give you the wine. We'll see. But the whole business of the teachings of Jesus got lost. We're pretty much unimportant. I think one good thing about the historical Jesus movement is that it caused people to look again at the teachings. Or as Father Richard Rohr said at Texas Christian University when he was there some years ago, he said, here I am in Texas. I know very well that in your courthouses you have posted the 10 Commandments. In every courthouse, where are the 8 Beatitudes of Jesus? Right? Which I get to talk about today in the sermon. They're not important. It's clearly not important because who believes things like, blessed are the peacemakers or blessed are those who mourn. It's just, it doesn't work, if you're trying to get millions of people in your church. You don't want to talk about things like that. Okay, how we doing? We got about 10 minutes more. Any questions at this point or concerns you want to bring up? Because I always think that if the presenter is doing his or her job, then, people are going to be moved to bring up something that may have been on their hearts for years or might have just come to the surface at that moment.
What about the Jefferson Bible?
What about the Jefferson Bible?
You
Well, we
left
know,
that out in your historical.
and your point, I guess, is that Right, the Jefferson Bible does sort of fit with this discussion, doesn't it? Thomas Jefferson didn't believe in any of the miracles of Jesus. So he actually, I guess, using scissors, snipped, I think we have that, snipped out all of the miracles so that he could have a Bible that he could actually believe in because he was a critical thinker, right? Let me say a word about the miracles. I appreciate this about Marcus Borg. Here is how he comes at it. Because he wrote about the miracles of Jesus in response to those who kind of nuanced things and said, you know, Jesus didn't actually perform miracles. He just took away the onus of the problem people had with being blind or lame or having leprosy. He just kind of just took that away and things were better for those people. And Borg said, that's bullshit. Because these are peasants we're talking about. They're not interested in the nuances of social interaction as much as they're interested in not being lame anymore, in not being sick anymore, in being able to see. He said, if Jesus didn't actually accomplish significant changes in people's illnesses, he wouldn't have gotten any traction. If there's anything we can believe for sure about him, that people came and lined up around the block to come to him for some sort of change, and they received something that assuaged their illnesses. Well, I appreciate his ability to be a little less academic and more practical with his understanding of Jesus when it comes to things like that. So thanks, Warren, for bringing that up right then and there. Anything else?
I was, you had mentioned early writings of the Romans about Jesus and his people. When did they start talking about him as Christ versus Jesus?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, look it up. You're gonna be a greeter.
You're going to be a reader. Thank you. Yeah.
Dramatic.
Yeah. Yes.
So if you believe Jesus did the miracles, why not believe he walked on water?
That's a darn good question. Yeah. That is like the $64,000 question, right? If you can believe that he healed somebody's sight, why not believe he couldn't walk on water? You want to answer
Well,
that?
I just want to say, Pastor, I have a lot of questions. This is not, we just talk about all these many things, but if that's true, then why can't we believe, I know this is horrible to say, but why can't we believe anything? Because they cut and paste and put things together as they want to.
Ooh.
Just constitute anybody, miracles, anyone, all these writers, they're cutting and pasting all these parts of the Bible, and
Okay. That's
it's
your percent.
very confusing as to what is real.
Okay. I got two things to say about that. That's very helpful. Hold on to that. I got to remember that. Hold on. The way where I want to go with that is Jesus was an itinerant preacher. So hold on to that in case I forget where I'm going. But your question is so helpful. And let me offer it to everyone. What is the difference between Jesus healing a man who's born blind, who has this amazing ability finally to see for the first time in his life, or healing the man even better? There's a story where he heals somebody by touching him, and he sees, And then the man says, I see people, but they look like trees walking. And then he heals them again. And he gets this beautiful, one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible. The difference between that and walking on water. What's the difference?
Psychosomatic.
Oh, you're talking about psychosomatic. Look at the possibility of psychosomatic healing. That is, that's definitely a question that is out there. I want to shine a light on the walking on water though part. Go ahead.
And healing, it's a transformation in the person
Yeah,
versus like Jesus' superpowers, right?
Jesus' superpowers. That's for me the difference. Is that the walking on water is a spectacle. And it goes back to the temptations of Jesus in the wilderness, where he's tempted to turn stones into bread, to jump from the temple heights and land and have the angels land him quietly on the ground so he doesn't die or have to go to the hospital. Or the other one, he could become the emperor of the world and make sure and do whatever he wants with that. Okay. And he says no to all those. And as I want to hurry on to say is he said no to being a showman. So the business of walking on water does seem like a showman kind of thing. It doesn't help anybody, as Aaron was saying. Doesn't make anybody's life better. Yes.
But when, when the disciples stopped believing that he was walking on water, he wasn't walking on water anymore.
I know. I think that's a wonderful metaphorical story about the power of belief. But do I think it really happened? No, I think the meaning of it carries forth from the metaphoric story. Yeah. Do I think Jesus got up early and went out to pray? Why not? You know, I mean, you look at the stories in the New Testament. There's things you could that seem just go with his personality, his person, and the rest of the story. And then there's things that kind of stick out like a sore thumb, like walking on water or disappearing into the heavens. Is he naked? What happens to his clothes? You know, there's all kinds of problems come up with somebody, right? He sits at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. All right. What's he wearing? I mean, that important. You know, we lose everything. I mean, we become a laughing stock to folks who are elitist, not snobs about such things. So we don't want to do that if possible. Okay. Trying to find a good place for us to finish. That's probably a good enough place. These are really, you know, this wouldn't mean a thing without your questions. These are really very helpful, especially this topic, because we're talking about, you know, common sense. What I want to do next week is talk about Jesus, that whole business of Jesus's addressing conventional wisdom of his time, the kind you find in the book of Proverbs, and his incredible common sense that gives the lie to some teachings that are we're tempted to believe because they make us feel better about life. Terrific. This has been great. Thanks for tuning in, Deb, Warren, Kirsten. Appreciate you very much. Let's adjourn and then reassemble.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Hi, Arnie. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
This is my second adult ed.
Yeah, yeah, well, I was finding it interesting.
I love the fact that I want to look at Proverbs and do this stuff very well.
Yes.
I haven't read that since I was fifth grade. I have no idea what it's about.
Did you go to a Catholic school or just a Catholic church?
Catholic Church and CCD.
Oh, yes, that's like communion classes.
Yeah, that's catechism.
Catechism and all the business, but we never, but I mean, there's so much.
Yeah, yeah,
Around the Bible now, it's confusing.
yeah,
I am an adult.
yeah.
Good go again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, now these are books that Dan brought. I feel like, I don't know if you meant to leave it here. What you
Yeah.
meant to do.
I feel like don't need to like read the Bible first.
No,
Read this thing.
absolutely not. No, you could read that and just have a Bible for reference. So that if they are talking about some
Go to
specific
that, right?
thing, sure. Then you can go to that and you can go there.
Sorry. What?